All right, welcome back, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing our second keynote presentation this morning, Dr. Sakobi Wilson. Dr. Sakobi Wilson is the Director of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. As an associate professor with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics in the University of Maryland at the College Park School of Public Health, he directs that center. He has over 20 years of experience as an environmental justice health scientist in the areas of exposure, environmental justice, community-based participatory research, the built environment, climate change, community resiliency, and sustainability. He works primarily in partnership with community-based organizations to study and address environmental justice and health issues and translate research to action. As I mentioned earlier this morning, we are in the middle of National Public Health Week, and each day there is a theme or a focus on a particular public health topic. Today, Thursday, the topic by chance is World Health Day, and the theme is Health is a Human Right. And so it's a pleasure for me to introduce an individual whose work involves community engagement and relates to the needs we heard earlier today around involvement on the academic side of the house with data-driven solutions that address community needs. And so I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Wilson and appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. I will share my screen. How much time do I have, y'all?
Ready? You have 30 minutes.
Well, I'll be talking today, thanks for the introduction. I'll be talking today about the use of technology to advance environmental justice. And I won't spend a lot of time on the background slides. But for me, when you think about the issues of environmental justice, you can't talk about environmental justice without talking about racism, environmental racism. If you think about the EJ movement, you know, the Dr. King, the 54th anniversary of assassination was actually on Monday. He, in my opinion, is the grandfather of the EJ movement. You know, your history was in Memphis working with the sanitation workers, right, on the strike. And you see people carrying around signs, I am a man, recognized my humanity. And in honor of today, Public Health Week, human rights are our rights, right, to clean air and clean water. So Dr. King is the grandfather of the EJ movement. The EJ movement got its national attention, of course, in Warren County, North Carolina in 1982, where Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chambers coined the term environmental racism, right? So it's about what we live, what we work, what we pray, what we play, what we learn. And environmental justice is about, you know, the overburden of communities due to race, ethnicity, right, with hazards, overexposure to pollutants, and then differential risk. And so you can't talk about environmental justice without talking about, you know, racism, environmental racism. And when I think about these EJ issues, overburden of hazards. So you look at North Carolina, you can look at heavily trafficked roadways built through Black communities, partly due to the National Highway Defense Act. You know what happened to Charlotte. You know how with Durham and how it's been fragmented, destroyed in many ways, the cultural fabric of those cities. Those cities had a lot of thriving Black communities. You look at issues of industrial hog farms in the eastern part of North Carolina, in the eastern hydrophysiologic plain, right? That's the EJ issue. So even if stories recently, the last couple of years, believe in North Carolina around the issues of heat, I like to say heat waves are hell for the poor and the elderly, and heat waves are hell for agricultural workers, right? So you have this overburden of hazards. The same communities have a high concentration of psychosocial stressors, and the same communities have a lack of access to infrastructure. It could be built or natural. So you know about the nature gap. Blacks have 3 times less access to nature compared to white counterparts. Low-income folks have 3 times less access to nature compared to their wealthy counterparts. So that lack of access to help promoting infrastructure is also an EJ issue. So these disparities can lead to exposure disparities and can lead to health disparities. I'm gonna keep it moving. So burden disparities, exposure disparities, this is the EJ science. Risk disparities, particularly when you think about climate change, whether it be different, different climate related perturbations, and then health disparities. Again, you can't talk about EJ issues, you can't talk about pollution without talking about race. Whites have a pollution advantage other folks of color, blacks of pollution disadvantaged, Hispanic people are disadvantaged. And I like to just use the term syndemic because I'm going quickly through these background slides. We're talking about environmental justice as a pandemic, so in a pandemic with coronavirus, right? But a lot of folks of color have been dealing with the pandemic of racism, the pandemic of climate change, the pandemic of environmental injustice, and the pandemic of SARS-CoV-2 and coronavirus. So it's multiple pandemics, which means that's a syndemic. And so air pollution, which I'm gonna talk about a lot in this presentation, impacts you across your whole life course. If you live in a community with EJ issues and you know there's air quality hotspots, I mean, real quickly, why y'all think COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting people of color? Because you got too many stationary mobile pollution sources in those same communities. It's not a rocket science, folks. When SARS-CoV-2 see someone reduce lung capacity, they're an easy target. Reduce cardiopulmonary capacity, they're an easy target, right? So impacts you in utero, impacts you as a baby, impacts you as a young adult, can impact you when you become an older adult. So what can we do? So I do a lot of community-engaged research, as was said in my introduction. It's all about making sure we, give people the scientific tools and the data that can translate to action. I like to focus on community science. I'll talk about citizen science too, but community science. And I learned how to do community science through my folks in North Carolina, like Naima Muhammad, like Gary Grant, like Steve Wing, my mentor at UNC Chapel Hill. Of course, Mr. Omega Wilson, who may be in the crowd, may not be in the crowd. But that's the type of science we should be doing. Look, got a little excited. I heard myself twice there. So you got community-based research is important to this, building off the community cultural knowledge systems, and you want to, really focus on community-driven science. And so citizen science is important too. It's a way to democratize science. I know a lot of folks are very interested in citizen science as relates to air quality monitoring. A lot of great work is happening in that space. And I'm on the board of the Citizen Science Association, and Omega Wilson and Miss Brenda, they're part of our environmental justice practitioners working group. But I joined the board to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to science. And the reason why it's important, again, if you think about technology and tools, we have to make sure we're not just having new technology and tools just for science sake, but what's actually being used for action. Omega likes to say communities are being tired of being used as guinea pigs. So with new technology, we just want better data collection. How's that data actually being used for action? Not moving from extraction to action science, right? Moving to what's wrong with you science to what's right with you science. That's how the technology needs to be used. We're real quickly created the community owned and managed research approach. So you think about, you have to marry advanced scientific techniques with, again, working with communities. The folks who live in the communities are the contextual experts. So for me, the academic science without community is incomplete science. Look at Boyer's 5 dimensions of science. If we're just using technology and science for data discovery, knowledge production, that's incomplete science. That's not enough. That's called pain pipping science in EJ communities. You just keep studying folks and not using that technology for change. What are you doing? You're getting change in your pocket. You may be getting to your promotion. By the way, I just got promoted to full professor 3 weeks ago, just to let y'all know. But you're not leaving the real change for the people, okay? That's important. So my center, we do empowerment science. We focus on the use of technology to empower, build capacity. And we do liberation science. It's to liberate communities from sacrifice zones, from toxic trauma, using technology in that way. So what are some of these tools? I'm gonna run through these tools real quickly because I know I don't have that much time. So one of the main tools that we use, and I think there's been advancements, are GIS tools, and also some of the citizen science tools. So you think about climate change, y'all seen this map before. Though this is globally, those who contribute the least to climate change are the ones impacted the most by it. I did a climate change risk map some years ago, and this is just a copy of the map, to look at vulnerability to climate change. What populations, what groups will be most vulnerable to climate change? And so here's just a map of climate change risk scores. And you see, parts of the California coast, you got a lot of the Northeast, you got some of the Midwest, but look at the South. What about the South? We continuously have more, in many ways, more climate risk, differential climate risk compared to other parts of the country. Hurricane zones, some of our agricultural operations, some of the heat island issues, but also the social terms of health, right? Unjust transportation, unjust housing, unjust food infrastructure, all those things contribute to it. Hurricane Harvey dumped 30 trillion gallons of rain on Houston a few years ago, right? In Houston, you have the North America's largest petrochemical corridor, the Houston Ship Channel, right? And that disproportionately impacts communities of color and low wealth communities in Houston. And this is what happened, before Harvey and after Harvey. And you had this. Y'all maybe remember the Valero facility. It had some leaks. I mean, I'm not sure they call them leaks. They had some high releases of benzene during the event. And so one of the ways to use GIS in areas that you're going to have more hurricanes, even if you look at Hurricane Katrina, what it hit New Orleans August 29th, 16 years ago. Well, yeah, going on 17 years ago now. Remember Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans on the same day last year on the 16th anniversary. So one of the things we did with Harvey is to look at what are vulnerability factors. And so using maps to look, assess vulnerability factors. So looking at TR facilities in the metropolitan Houston area versus percent people living in poverty, right? And you can see spatial patterns where there's more toxic release center facilities in areas where you have more people in poverty compared to areas that have fewer people, less percentage of people in poverty, right? People of color, you can see a similar pattern. So if you want to deal with equity and preparedness, right? Equity and response, equity recovery, you can use GIS. This is the purpose of this map. This kind of show you what you want to know. Oh, it's a hurricane coming through. What's to be invested in building climate resiliency, right? You see similar patterns with air pollution sources. You also see when you look at air pollution and poverty and air pollution and people of color. Now, you may have seen Shaughnessy's work about looking at redline communities, communities that were, didn't get loans and there was divestment, disinvestment versus non-redline communities. And you see a difference in temperature, right? One of the things that I want to highlight here real quickly is how we can use citizen science and sensors to do the work to figure out what's happening and then get some action and then tell the stories of heat and heat waves. I said earlier that heat waves are hell for the poor and the elderly. A lot of our cities are impacted by urban heat islands because a lot of concrete and asphalt, the albedo effect that many of y'all are familiar with. Then you have greenhouse gases get trapped. And so you got folks who have been exposed to both combustion byproducts, right, in those urban heat islands, but also heat, okay? In our state of Maryland, Baltimore has more heat-related morbidity and mortality events than any other city in the state because of concrete and asphalt, because of the lack of trees, right? Getting back to that green infrastructure, nature gap. And so one thing that students at my campus did a few years ago, they actually did a citizen science project where they worked with local residents in different parts of Baltimore to put out temperature sensors and to really look at what was the impact, put some impact to heat and the differential heat exposure across the city. And so I just want to show this real quickly. If you look at the picture up top, they have sensors out. You see the sensors that they have. You can see the power of the impact of one tree, y'all. You can see a 15 to 20. So I'm gonna step back. That's when some reports in Baltimore said, "Oh my God, across neighborhoods, comparing neighborhoods to neighborhood, 16-degree differences in temperature, right? Across blocks." What I'm showing you in this picture is on the same block, on the same side of the street, and the same row of houses, the benefits of one tree. So you can see how citizen science putting out temperature sensors, you can see the power of just one tree as you go from house to house, the difference in temperature. And then look, if you go to the house further down to the left, in the left side, you can see multiple trees, how it compares to the house with one tree and the house with no trees. So this is how you can use technology. Many of you may be familiar with the public health tracking programs across the country. I believe the CDC actually has its own EJ dashboard now, so y'all can check that out. And I know they're in the process of trying to create maybe a more advanced EJ mapping tool. And so we have a project to look at the environmental public health tracking program in the state of Maryland. I just want to highlight this as an opportunity for folks to work with their state agencies to develop, they have a mapping tool, but then developing toolkits and doing outreach to take that information, that science and that data and share it with impacted communities. And so we've done some data story maps around asthma, around lead, using GIS as well, and to basically tell the stories of exposures using this EPSG data but in a way that visualize it and share it in a way that makes sense, communicate science in a way that makes sense to various stakeholders. And so we've had a couple of workshops. Do this. I have an annual symposium where we kind of bring some of this information in. So I just wanted to just highlight this is another kind of technology that we need to think about building more connections to, particularly when I get to the slides about screening tools and how there should be some interoperability between our national level and federal level, state level screening tools in our national level kind of public health tracking tool for CDC, and then the state level tracking tools. Just wanted to highlight that real quick. So getting to the screening tools, many of you may be aware of environmental justice screening and mapping tools, EJSM. I wrote a paper, if you want to go online, with the National Wildlife Federation on environmental justice screening tools. You can find that. There's also a paper by the Luskin Center at UCLA on the Justice 40 initiative. I'll come in a few slides. But basically, the goal of these screening tools is really to provide a visualization tool that allows you to visualize areas where they have environmental injustices, right? So the use of GIS or geospatial visualization. And so you have multiple tools at the state level. The oldest state level tool is California's CalEnviroScreen. Most of the tools to visualize environmental justice at the state level are on the coast. Washington State has a tool. California has the oldest tools that I already said. Colorado has a tool. I believe Massachusetts has a tool. New York has a tool. Rhode Island has a tool. New Jersey has a tool. Maryland has a tool. Virginia has more of a mapper, a basic mapper. I wouldn't call it the EJ screen. I know North Carolina has a tool, but in the South, Deep South, Gulf Coast, and most of the Midwest, there are no tools. I think Michigan just released this tool about 2 weeks ago. I believe Minnesota has a tool, but outside of that, Illinois may have a tool too. But outside of that, most of the Midwest, there's no tools, and most of the South, there are no state level mapping tools. And so in this screening tool, what we do, we follow the CalEnviroScreen method. We have different indicators in the exposures bucket, exposure domain. So you have like PM 2.5, ozone, right? NADA cancer risk, NADA neurological risk, NADA respiratory risk. We have pollution burden. So you have proximity to a hazard. So you can say proximity to a supermarket site, proximity to a brownfield, proximity to a water discharger, proximity to a stationary source permitted by a major source permitted by the Clean Air Act, or a minor source permitted by the Clean Air Act. Proximity to a CAFO could be another one you may want to have in that bucket. Then we have sensitive populations. So people over age 65, people below age 5. Look at this susceptible population. And also health indicators like percent asthma, percent heart disease, and things like that. And then socioeconomic factors. You can have things like median household income or percent below the federal poverty line. You can have percent household education, underemployment. You can have some racial ethnic variables. You can have linguistic isolation, et cetera. And so we basically combine those into a score. And you can get a score at the tract level, depending on how your tool operates, usually at the block group level, or even at the block level if your tool works in that way. We also built a tool that will be useful, that's maybe useful to this audience, called a park equity mapping tool. So it's a tool that we built in partnership with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And it's a tool just to look at equity and park access in the state. So think again about climate change and climate change mitigation, not having access to parks and green space. What does that do? And then not having access to parks. What does it mean for mental health, playability, people's ability to exercise, enjoy nature? Really decrease that nature gap. So here are the layers in that tool, and you can see the website, the link for the tool. But we have park distance, population density, income, percent non-white, linguistic isolation, children below 18, adults over 65, walkability, and access to transit. And then we're building a climate equity and health tool. So it's still kind of emerging. It needs more development, but we have things like proximity to flood zones, canopy cover, medically underserved areas, some of the SOVI and SVI indices in there as well. But these are types of tools that you can build to really look at, areas with environmental injustice, areas that are at risk of differential climate risks, areas where you want to have more green space and parks. And so we received some funding recently from the EPA to upgrade our EJ screen tool. Most of these state level tools are very urban centric. They don't do a good job of looking at rural areas. And so we're trying to bring in more agricultural rural indicators and also bring in more children's health related indicators too. Okay. Now, I mentioned the Justice 40 initiative. Many of you may or may not be familiar with it. Executive Order 430 of this administration, as we move from a dirty energy economy to clean energy economy, 40% of those benefits should be delivered to disadvantaged communities. So the Council of Environmental Quality has built a tool that came out about a month ago, I believe, a beta version of the tool, that Justice 40 tool, to basically map disadvantaged areas in the country using what I call a double matrix approach. So you have a set of domains that you have to hit certain thresholds, like for climate related domains, they have damages, they have social demographic indicators, you have to hit certain thresholds. They have air quality related indicators that hit certain thresholds. And then they have the double matrix. They also have an income indicator that they use to kind of screen and kind of prioritize, identify those disadvantaged areas of concern. And so I think the Justice 40 concept is a great concept. There was a bill passed in New York a couple of years back. And so this Justice 40 concept is modeled off of that legislation in New York. The problem is, and those of you who are interested in reviewing the tool, you can go to CEQ's website. If you want to provide comments on the tool, the comment period closes on April 18th. I will be providing robust comments. We're up to 12 pages, single space. Excited about that. So basically, the problem with the tool is, one major issue is it doesn't include race. And I said earlier, you can't talk about environmental justice without talking about race. Race is the single most important predictor of the distribution of environmental hazards. And so the exclusion of race makes you gonna have a watered down tool. So for me, if those of you in the state with North Carolina with your tool, if you're gonna use this approach, that CEQ tool is an initial screen. It's your first screen. It is not your final screen. So you need to have a more robust, rigorous screen that's a secondary screening approach beyond the CEQ tool. And one way to do that is make sure your tool in North Carolina is contextualized to the needs, the issues, the impacts that are found in North Carolina that may not be found in other parts of the country. So this is just a map of using the tool for the state of Maryland. And I have a zoom in to the right, you see the city of Baltimore. Baltimore has a lot of EJ issues. It has a medical incinerator, a trash incinerator. It has the Curtis Bay area, which I'll get to. If y'all can cut me off if I get too long. So this area, Dr. Wilson, time is up. Let me know. I'm gonna keep moving though, but just want to kind of dig into this a little bit. So right now, if you look at Baltimore, this map does not show where the EJ issues are with the high magnitude areas. So because they didn't include race, it's a watered down representation of what's actually happening on the ground. This is a very stark problem that I see in this map. And so this is just a quick example of how this tool is really not capturing the areas that we know that passed the eye test that had EJ issues. Now, one other problem with the tool is it's not going to capture unincorporated areas. Y'all know about unincorporated communities in the South, our colonials on the border, our brothers and sisters, indigenous brothers and sisters live on reservations, post-slavery Black neighborhoods, pre-New Deal communities. These communities are census place divisions, what CDPs, whatever they call it. They're unincorporated. What does unincorporated mean? Contamination without what? Representation. Okay? So you got a lot of communities like in Lowndes County, Alabama, Uniontown, Alabama. Folks don't have access to water in many of our rural areas. Many of those communities are unincorporated. They also get dumped on. You see a lot of times these highways been built through post-Soviet Black neighborhoods, and cemeteries have been basically constructed over. We don't care about the living, we don't care about the dead either, right? And so if you look at these three maps, this first map is a map where of using our Maryland EJ screen. We actually have unincorporated areas in the tool, okay? The map in the top right corner is a map using CEQ's tool. And the map in the bottom right is our Justice 40 bill. So just like CEQ, in our state, I try to work with some colleagues to push through a Justice 40 bill. They would say, oh, we don't want to include race because we're scared of the Supreme Court, blah, 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 and it being knocked down. And so we had the same nonsense exclusion of race in our tool too. I just want to say, and not our tool. In Maryland EJ screen, the scoring approach, we do have it. But in our Justice 40 bill, it was excluded. I want to be clear about that. But what we also figured out when we did our initial work with our Justice 40 indicators. Some of the EJ communities that passed the eye test, they weren't captured. You know why? Because they're unincorporated. So you see right now in the CQ tool in the top right-hand corner that map Brandywine and Lothian, which are well-known EJ communities in our state. Look how low the EJ score is. That's a problem. Now you look at our Justice 40 bill, which also excluded race and initially did not include unincorporated areas. It also is bad. But you look at our EJ screen tool, we brought in unincorporated communities. Look at what you see. So those communities are captured well when you bring in unincorporated areas. In the CQ tool, this is a representation of how that tool does not capture rural areas well. And then another issue in rural areas, in Maryland, we have industrial chicken farms. That's a CAFO. North Carolina, y'all have industrial hog farms. The CQ tool, as you see from the score, it doesn't do a good job of capturing the areas in the Eastern Shore that have a lot of chicken farms. But we have CAFOs in Maryland EJ screen. So we do capture it well, okay? So the CQ tool I'm saying is, doesn't do a good job of capturing urban areas where you have a lot of EJ issues, they have a lot of folks of color like Black folk. And then it doesn't capture the lack of infrastructure in the underserved communities and the overburdened communities in rural areas. So, okay, I'm gonna keep it moving on that. I don't want to beat the tool up too much. But this just gives you another example of Baltimore, the stark difference. When you use our Maryland EJ screen tool, the score that you see, when you use the CQ tool, the score that you see, and then when you use our Justice 40 bill again, because we also excluded race, the score that you see. Baltimore has a lot of EJ areas, but CQ tool, as it stands right now, will not capture those areas well. So let me keep it moving. Big issue is air quality. And this is air quality conference. I want to make sure I spend some time on this. So, a lot of communities are dealing with mobile stationary pollution sources, dealing with a particular matter. Particular matter is dust and air. So y'all know it causes asthma attacks, it causes stroke, heart disease, elevation of blood pressure, contributes to Alzheimer's, diabetes, infant mortality rates, birth defects, low birth weight, right, cancer, more mortality, right, and impacts your life expectancy. So that's just one combustion byproduct. You also have volatile organic compounds, right? You can have polyunsaturated aromatic hydrocarbons, and you got black carbon. So you got a lot of communities of color that have a lot of big trucks, light and heavy duty vehicles going through, buses and school buses. Do y'all know that children of color disproportionately ride school buses? But because of the black carbon emissions, short-term exposure to diesel exhaust impacts your coordination, concentration, and focus. Just a quick tangent I want to go on. So just to leave y'all with this one point. How you gonna put America first and put your kids first? Okay? So part of the thing here I'm talking about, we got to understand the impacts of buses on air quality. And because we have so many communities of color had to have heavily traffic roadways, what we call trap, not trap music, for those y'all know trap music, but traffic-related air pollution. How are we going to make sure our kids are going to have the ability to reach their full potential if they live in communities with all this air pollution? And as I said earlier, how are we going to make sure people can be healthy if they live in communities with a lot of air pollution, particularly as you relate to COVID-19? If you go to the data, I think the study came out last year, Black folks that lost 3 years of life expectancy during this pandemic. Some is related to economic stressors, the virus, of course, but what conditions led them to have higher morbidity rates for COVID and higher mortality rates? Air pollution. So one of the things, going back to the citizen science piece I talked about earlier, we need to make sure we engage in communities in doing air quality monitoring and community science, okay? And this is the paper that I published a couple years ago that kind of lays out a framework for that. And also, you gotta think, what is the types of monitors we wanna have to look at air quality issues? So some of y'all may know these acronyms, some of you may not know. I know I'm getting low on time. You got federal reference method monitors that are like the ones that are used for permitting, compliance issues. You got near FRM, you got FEM, federal equalization method monitors. You got near FEM indicator monitors. Many of those low-cost sensors, like the purple area that people are using, that's an indicator monitor. And so you think about the pyramid of how these monitors will be used. A lot of low-cost sensors could be really used for more for education, maybe some public health research, but then the near FEM and FEM, you want to use those for ordinances, and then the FRM regulations and lawsuits. But I would say that we can use the low-cost system for more than just getting a signal. We can use it for doing more. So we got air. So what I'm doing is building a lot of hyperlocal air quality monitoring networks to look at these issues across the country. We built a network in Prince George's County. We're doing some work to build a network in our schools. We have a network in Cheverland, Maryland, doing hyperlocal air quality monitoring. And you can see this is a Purple sensor. Here's some data from those sensors. And this is some work we did last year. And we found that the levels of from the purple areas of Cheverly were below the standard, the annual standard, of the daily standard, but above the annual standard. We done this work in Uniontown, Alabama. So we have a network in Uniontown. So let's go through this real quickly. We've done some fist line monitor there. Curtis Bay had a coal pile explosion. This is a goods boom community. This is just an example where you also ports in goods boom areas, you can in warehouses. We're doing some work around using low cost sensors. I'm gonna go through these slides. I'm gonna get to one. I know I see the wrap up. So that's real quick. Some of the innovations that we want to see in air quality monitoring, satellite-based monitoring. Look at the work of Dr. Annenberg and GW. And then Aclima is doing mobile-based monitoring. So I want to end here. If we're going to really get to using technology well to address EJ issues strictly around air quality, we got to use the best technology. Mobile-based air quality monitoring is where it's at, in my opinion. And this just to give you examples of the mobile monitoring in San Francisco. You can see this map shows you CO2 levels after 7 weeks of monitoring. So they're using cars to do monitoring, VOC, CO, methane, PM2.5, NO, black carbon, VOCs, okay? And so I think the innovations that we need to see to address EJ, we have GIS, I talked about that already. We have screening tools, we have low-cost sensors, we have satellite data, but we also need to be leveraging mobile monitoring across our communities with EJ issues to make sure we can translate that data to action. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
That wrap-up sound a couple times. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So impressive. Congratulations on your promotion. Time for a couple of questions. June.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that information. Hopefully everybody was inspired by the amount of work you're doing, and we have, I was taking lots of notes. So one of the things that needs to happen in North Carolina is an equitable air permitting system so that the state doesn't continue to approve polluters in our rural areas especially. So what I want to push and what a lot of us in here are interested in doing is getting this State Department of Health and Human Services to create a health equity map like they have in Washington State. And that came out there through legislation. We don't think it's going to come through legislation here. So in Maryland, did you have any kind of EJ legislation to encourage your research, or you've just, you have a good relationship with DHHS there, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would say just for real quickly for everyone, I think the Climate Commitment Act that was passed in Washington State is a model for North Carolina. The Cumulative Impacts Bill that was passed in New Jersey is a model for North Carolina. It took 10 years to get passed. The Massachusetts Climate Bill is a model for North Carolina. The Climate Act in New York is also a model for North Carolina. We, under executive order, had an EJ commission that was established back in 2001. If y'all know Bernice Miller Travis, she was the original co-chair, one of the co-chairs of it. She's an EJ icon. But we've had difficulty getting EJ legislation passed in the state of Maryland. We're supposedly a progressive state. We're very regressive in action. And so we actually had the Justice 40 bill did not pass this session, but we're trying to get the Justice 40 language into the budget. That's another approach for y'all in North Carolina. We try to get there is a Climate Solutions Now Act that has some climate equity elements in it that may pass this session. This is in the 4th year for it, so it's taking 4 sessions if it does pass. But so there's been some legislation, but it hasn't been that successful. We were able to last year to pass a bill to get the commission, to strengthen the commission, because the commission was very weak over a period of a decade. And they also had an ag person as a community representative on the commission. I'm sorry, when you have an ag person on your commission as a community representative, that means you have a fraudulent commission. So we actually finally got that modified last year. But I would say in North Carolina, we do, in Maryland, we do have a good relationship with our health agency. Cliff Mitchell runs the Environmental Health Division in the health agency. So we're going to start doing some air quality monitoring together to connect it to some of the asthma. There was the ACEs program, or the asthma surveillance program for children that we had, right? So we're starting to do that. We also working together now to start bringing air quality monitoring and environmental justice into climate action planning with some of the county agencies in the state of Maryland. So that's in progress. And I actually have a great emerging relationship with our Maryland Department of Environment. Tad Aber runs the air quality division. He is very excited about doing action. So that Chevrolet data that I shared with y'all earlier, he actually used that data to do inspections in the companies in Chevrolet, and also to push for more inspections related to anti-idling. And now we're going to take some of that data to try to get some DERA funding to transition the buses and trucks to electric. So it's a combination of legislation, not going as well, but combination of relationships. We have good relationships with our state agencies. So I would say, just to go to the next question, I think the way to get it done in North Carolina, because I know the politics, because I went to grad school at UNC. Sorry that we didn't win the other night. For those of you who are UNC grads, not Duke, NC State, or other colleges, I understand. We love you too. But executive order would be the approach to take, to see if the governor could do. And I think there's some things happening in executive order to get the EJ committee that y'all have now. So maybe the executive order would be a route to take to push forward on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions? Okay, we'll pause here. But Dr. Wilson, you're going to hold on to your spot for the panel that comes right behind you on maps and apps. And as we get organized, we'll keep you informed. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Yeah.